Joe Rogan has called Silicon Valley a censorship machine, and he is, of course, right, as we all know, because that's what they are. A deliberate, ideological censorship machine. And that's the point that Rogan has put his thumb on that is correct. And so I thought it would be worth talking about. So recently, he did a roundtable version of Timcast IRL stream. This is yesterday's Timcast IRL stream, where he had Joe Rogan, Alex Jones, Michael Malice, and a couple of others, like Luke Rudowski and a couple of others. That must have been amazing. I haven't had time to watch it, unfortunately, so I've only been able to go over the extracts and clips and whatnot that I've seen going around from it, but I will watch it tonight because it sounds like a really good time. But in it, Joe Rogan says, all these internet companies, whether it's Google, Facebook, or Instagram, if they can censor you based on your ideology, then you don't have freedom of speech. It's correct.
Yeah.
If you can just be censored because of the political opinions you have, that's not free speech. The whole point of free speech is so you can air political opinions without being censored. Usually it was by the government, but of course, this is now being done by private entities who have gained what I can only describe as a kind of monopoly, acting in a cartel fashion across the entire internet, because of course this is a very new piece of technology. I realize that Zoomers might not realize this, but 20 years ago there wasn't an internet. Not at least as you understand it. This sort of thing just wasn't possible, it didn't exist, and now it does, and it's in the hands of a very few number of companies. In fact, Google is something like 90% of the internet as well, just so you know.
That's astonishing.
Yeah, Google alone is like 90% of the internet. It is absolutely astonishing the grasp that they have. And this is why I actually don't use Google as my search engine browser search engine, because you can tell the difference if you use something like DuckDuckGo, which doesn't politically curate their content, compared to Google, which does. You can find things using DuckDuckGo that you just can't find on Google. And it's like, really makes me think. But anyway, this is, of course, as I said, a correct assessment. That's been happening unbelievable. And Rogan himself has been the victim of this kind of censorship from Silicon Valley companies. When he went over to Spotify, something like 100 of his podcasts weren't allowed to go over, including my appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. So, he's been the victim of it himself. He suggested that big tech is functionally some sort of utility, which I think it is fair to describe as, and cautioned when it's literally one of the two or three main ways that human beings share ideas across planet Earth, it's bigger than just a company. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but we have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And he's right. And there is such a thing in America called privately owned public spaces as well. So it's not like they don't already have rules that could apply to this. And, this may well be your private area, but it's also a public space. And, you have to accept the various rules of the United States, including, say, the First Amendment, which I think is a reasonable standard for American companies to have applied to them. But the question really is, where does the left object to that? He's basically saying, look, we should nationalize social media.
It's a universal social good, and it should now be recognised as such.
Exactly. And you'd think the leftists who are like, nationalize, would be constantly banging that drum, but they're not, are they?
No. Why could that be?
Why could that be? Well, because the unfortunate thing would have to apply, which would be the application of constitutional rules to these platforms, of course, because it's government owned. And that means fairness and tolerance for the right wing.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want that, do they? They wouldn't be allowed to censor or impose these sort of specific penalties based on ideological grounds, because it would have to be for everyone, because of course it would be taxpayer funded, and therefore everyone would have a right to it.
They wouldn't be allowed to outgrow the US Constitution itself.
Exactly. And there have been, like, for example, Twitter's Jack Dorsey has said that he thinks social media is a human right. It's like, okay, but you deplatformed a sitting president. Like, so did you just violate the human rights of the sitting president and Alex Jones and, loads of other people? It seems that he would by his own standards. But anyway, speaking of Twitter have got specifically ideological rules. And this is one of those examples where it's like, look, this is a partisan rule that is designed to penalize one political faction at the expense of another. In 2018, Twitter banned misgendering and dead naming. It's a very, very small constituency of people that this applies to. And it's very ideologically charged, isn't it? This is the T in the LGBT. A Twitter spokesperson said, targeting someone because of their gender identity has always been a violation of our hateful conduct policy. We updated our terms of service this year with more specifics on this type of speech to ensure our rules are clear on how we enforce them with everyone. That's true, but that's literally like, the communists saying, well, look, we've always forbidden bourgeois property ownership. This is clear for everyone. We're going to enforce that universally. It's like, yeah, but it's expressly political what you're trying to do with it. The point of it is to penalize a certain segment of the population. And the point of this is to penalize conservatives. You have people like Ben Shapiro saying, well, I'm not going to, in principle, because I, being a conservative, don't think you get to choose your gender identity. I think that's an essential part of you because of your biology, and it's ascribed to you by other people by the way you display yourself in society, by what you present as. And that's true, honestly. I think that's the correct way of looking at it. But Twitter has said, no, we have an ideological stance on this, and therefore people like Ben Shapiro essentially have to curb their own speech online in order not to fall afoul of this particular rule.
Yeah.
So anyway, returning to the article, Rogan shows that he is well aware of this bias, which is excellent. He said the big tech censors and the left are allied. Quote, the way it censors is always in favor of the left, and people on the left think that's a good idea, but eventually you can't be left enough. It just keeps going. It's a machine. It's Pac-Man. And this is, of course, not a coincidence. Next week, we'll have a premium podcast coming out on lotus.com about Herbert Marcuse's repressive tolerance. Do you want to give us a quick rundown since you're the expert?
Yeah, so repressive tolerance is effectively the essay that effectively declares on what we understand as Anglo-American democracy, which is the idea that we should actually tolerate every single constituent within the legal structure that we have. It's basically a cry out from the intellectual class to say that democracy is only ever going to lead to authoritarianism and tyranny, and we've just got to bring about the best form of democracy we can as led by ourselves. That's what the entire essay attempts to justify.
But that's a very, very high-minded description of what I was going for is the mechanism in which they're going to do this is by rescinding tolerance from what they consider to be right-wing or reactionary forces.
Yeah, reactionary, bigoted forces.
Yes, because that's not going to bring about this the opportunity to move into this glorious atomized communist utopia.
And they've got to remove the very possibility of them ever having a thing to say.
Yes. Exactly. We go through this in great detail in this podcast, so it'd be worth checking out. But the point is, this is why it only goes one way. You say, well, what's the connection between Marcuse and what's happening in Silicon Valley? And the answer is universities. These students get radicalized, and Marcuse radicalized a bunch of students himself. And this, again, it's called critical theory for a reason, and you will see this critical race theory, intersectionality to the LGBT movement. These activists have been radicalized through the universities, as Jordan Peterson himself pointed out, and are now working in these companies. And this is why these companies have their own sort of internal lobbies against, the internal lobby against Facebook being a right-wing disinformation machine. The people who staff YouTube and Twitter and all this, they're all radical left-wingers in Marcuse's mold.
Yeah. And they're now in bed with, I suppose, the legacy media itself, with the exception maybe of Fox News and a few.
Yes, a few, again, conquests like Second Law or something, anything not explicitly right-wing eventually becomes left-wing. And it's because of this. It's this removal of tolerance of mistakes or, boundary violations that only applies to the right-wing. It doesn't apply to the left for specifically ideological reasons, because if it's not done this way, communism can never be achieved. That's what it is. Anyway, so... this, in fact, you did a video talking about the structure of this new morality.
Yes.
In a new video series that you're doing called Critical Base Theory.
That's correct.
Talking about the hyperreality of wokeness and the sort of moral structure that they're trying to achieve.
Yes, that's right.
Do you want to give us a quick overview since we're here?
Yes. Well, in effect, what I do in the first half of this segment is explain how Marcuse was actually afraid of something called the convergence of opposites. That is the potential for capitalism to actually annex its opposition so as to make itself look progressive. And
woke capitalism,
basically. Yeah. And the second half is me explaining how the Marxist theory of commodity fetishism can be extended to moral action, and how a better way of understanding wokeness and woke politics is as a simulation, effectively, whereby being seen to do a good moral thing on the grounds of some abstract social performative value system has come to have more value than actually acting moral itself.
Yes. Again, virtue signaling.
Yes.
Rather than being virtuous. But yeah, so we're talking about this a lot. I'll leave a link in the description or pinned in the comments or something. And anyway, let's move on. Returning to the article, Joe Rogan explained, a lot of things have opened my eyes concerning the severity of big tech censorship. He recounted how the censorship of evolutionary biologist Brett Weinstein's Unity Party made him reevaluate big tech's biases. So I haven't had time to watch the full podcast yet, unfortunately, because it was only yesterday and I'm a busy man. I'm surprised that he wouldn't have said Alex Jones, who was in the room with him, who got deplatformed within the same week by all of the big tech companies. until the only platform he had left was Twitter. And literally they were asking Jack Dorsey, why haven't you censored Alex Jones? And Dorsey had to come out and say, well, he hasn't actually violated the rules yet. And then within a couple of days, he was gone.
He happened to have violated the rules.
Yeah. So somehow he just managed to do it. But I think the best example is, of course, Donald Trump, the sitting president, who said, don't go into the Capitol building, was accused of inciting them to go in, the rioters to go into the Capitol building, and then just taken off all that day. So interesting, but it's good that, it is, strange that it's Brett Weinstein's Unity Party that made him do it, but, I get fine, whatever. It's all part of the same unfortunate series of events where big tech is like, well, anyone who's challenging this kind of critical theory framing of left-wing politics, like Brett Weinstein is, like all the right-wingers are, like, dissidents to this are, they're on the chopping block. They're going to get it eventually. You're all going to get it eventually, or you're going to fall in line. Anyway, so there's a Vox article gloating about this, and for them, this went all the way back until Milo Yiannopoulos. Have you got this one, John? But yeah, there we go. So it's they were sort of basically gloating, saying, "Ha ha ha! What's it like to be deplatformed?" Well, it's not fun. It's you fall into the habit of saying, well, look, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my whatever account is my voice to the world, and you like to use that voice, and everyone has one, and so it's quite ostracizing to not have one. And they do this on purpose. They know that's why they do it. And so they are quite open about getting things deplatformed, such as, say, the social media platform Parler. The entire platform got deplatformed, if you remember, for false allegations about the January 6th riot, saying, this riot that wasn't encouraged by Trump wasn't, they claimed it was organized on Parler, which it wasn't. We actually know where it was organized because the data is all there, because of course social media is on the internet, and the internet is just data and it's there forever. We know it was organized on Facebook, which is what the Facebook whistleblower came out and said. So actually it was that. Parler's still not back on Google, the Google store. Like I can't use Parler because I've got a Android phone. So I need the Google store because I don't have Apple, because God forbid, not that using Google's
It's funny how
better.
they just let that slide, isn't it?
It's weird, but Parler does still exist in some sort of weird half limbo, but I can't use it, so I don't know. But obviously follow us on Getter, because that's what we use at the moment. Although saying that, I'm on pretty much every social media apart from Twitter and Parler now. But the point is, they know that it was Facebook that this was organized on, but of course Facebook is part of the club. It's part of the Silicon Valley cartel, and we know it's part of a cartel because a while ago, we actually covered this in a video about a week ago. It turned out that Facebook and Google have agreements not to upset the apple cart, because Google was monopolizing the online advertising market space. Facebook is basically the rest of that online marketing space, and they have back scratching agreements, which surely can't be legal, but who cares? What can be done? It's not like the Biden administration is going to do anything, because they're direct beneficiaries of this. Anyway, returning to the article, you can see the structure of this organism, that is taking over the United States, can't you? Very left-wing, supports the Democrat Party. There was Robert Epstein, who was a Democrat operative, I believe it was, or like a Democrat advisor, who testified before Congress that millions of votes were being funneled to Hillary Clinton because of the way that Google's structured. And it's like, I should have got it up for this segment. I forgot about it until right now. But the point is, you can see that, like as Rogan points out, it's always going to the left. It's always going one way. And it's designed like that for a reason. It's ideological, it's mechanical, and it's unfair against the right. And this is why they don't want these nationalized. Because if these were nationalized, they wouldn't be able to do that. It would literally be become a sort of constitutional right to have a so media account.
Yeah, they'd have to act in accordance to the very thing that they've decided they hate.
Exactly. That's exactly right. They'd have to be fair. And so they don't want it. So suddenly they're against their nationalize, abolish private property. Oh no, it's fine when the social media barons are on our side. But anyway, going back to the article, Rogan continues. You guys banned an account for no reason because you thought that account, which is run by a bunch of influential people, influential intellectuals, was somehow going to take votes away from what you thought the party was that should win. This is talking about Brett Weinstein's Unity Party. And so you just ban the account. And so then you're making these ideological choices about free speech. You're saying free speech is not as important as a result that I want, so you're going to ban people. Again, exactly in line with Mark Hughes's philosophy on this, right? which you will see when the premium podcast's out. But Rogan is exactly making the case against progressivism here. He's repudiating Mark Hughes' view of the progressive future, the atomic men that can be created, and is siding with the classically liberal principles of process over consequence. The process itself is the thing that matters, not the consequence of the process. Anyway, so they finish here. The host of the Roundtable, Tim Pool, observed that Rogan has specifically seen the light on big tech censorship for multiple reasons. For one, like Joe really started to understand and see what's going on as things got worse, but also that things are getting worse. I want to make sure I preface this by saying that freedom-loving individuals, liberty-minded individuals, are winning many battles across the board, but on the censorship stuff, as this becomes the new corporate press, it's getting worse. Over time, they are homogenizing what YouTube is and what they want it to be, that mainstream narrative. And this is, of course, definitely true. They're very much concerned about information flow on YouTube. It used to be, again, you only have to go back like 5 years, and YouTube is a very open platform, very tolerant, very liberal. You could say things, you know, and if you said something that wasn't the right thing to say, it was fine because that's what free speech is. And if you didn't like what someone said, you could sue them. Like Alex Jones got sued a lot over what he said about Sandy Hook. I don't think he should have been deplatformed of it. He spent millions in payouts to these families because of just the things he said. Rightfully so. You know, if he said something completely false about them, yeah, fine, sue him. Good. That's how it should be. So anyway, this again is not new. Susan Wojcicki has censored 500,000 COVID-19 misinformation videos.
It's hard to imagine that many was being made, isn't it?
Well, no, it's hard to imagine that YouTube knows what counts as misinformation when it comes to COVID-19, since the rest of the world doesn't bloody seem to. But somehow YouTube knows. I mean, the World Health Organization has got multiple contradicting statements. Fauci is known as a public flip-flopper because he's had every single position that is possible to have on the subject of COVID. And it's like, so what's misinformation here? You don't know. They don't know. This is all like, you know, it's a new thing. It's been difficult to get the information. I realize you're all scared, but it's not your job to do that, Susan. What your job is to host videos. Yeah. Then the public dialogue is supposed to act without you and around what you've done here. But instead, you're curating it. You're engineering it. You have an agenda here.
The whole point is that they're not in a position to decide.
Yes, exactly. And so who elected you? You know, and you'd say, well, it's just people using our platform. Wow, okay, fair enough. That's how it works. Then you're licensing a lot of other things that I don't think would be considered very democratic otherwise, right? Anyway, so finally, we know that people don't like this as well because YouTube's own internal information. When Susan Wojcicki, when the COVID started happening, she's like, right, we're going to start promoting these news sources. We're going to start specifically curating the kind of media you can see on YouTube, and we're going to put it in front of people's eyes. And the users didn't like them, like at all. And she was well aware of this, but they did it anyway.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters, you can catch us live 1 p.m. UK time on our website. And if you'd like more from us, you can also subscribe to find some of our premium content.
Yeah, we actually have absolutely loads on there now because we're over a year old at this point. So we've got a massive library of content that you can't find anywhere else, such as our regular series, which are Contemplations and Epochs. Contemplations, we have philosophical and scientific discussions. And in Epochs, we have long, in-depth conversations about things that happen in history. This is one we did recently about the Nika riots, the absolutely brutal Nika riots in Constantinople. I really enjoyed doing myself. But we also have we also have loads of expert articles from people who know what they're talking about, such as this one talking about the misnomer of postmodern neo-Marxism. You may well remember Jordan Peterson getting castigated by left-wing activists for using the phrase. Well, it is a bit of a misnomer, but Thomas happens to be an expert in this subject, and so he takes you through it. And as you can see, there is a silver and gold tier member audio track that goes along with it. So if you don't want to have to read it, you can just listen to it instead. But we also have a bunch of premium podcasts that we can't really host on YouTube because of editorial guidelines, shall we say, such as Harry doing this excellent one, What Happened to the January 6th Rioters, and another one, in fact, that Harry and myself did about a whistleblower from a German public broadcaster talking about the COVID coverage and the particularly engineered narrative in which they can't talk about certain things. And so this leaves a bunch of questions up in the air, and we explore that. Again, editorial guidelines mean we can't really host that elsewhere. We also have a bunch of really excellent interviews. I did one recently with a chap called Philip Tanzer. He's if you're a men's rights activist, you may have heard of him because he comes out of that space, but he's also an ex-gay porn star who's turned conservative activist who has some very interesting opinions.
Very interesting trajectory to take.
Yeah, it's the sort of person you're probably not going to meet in your regular life, but he's a fascinating guy. He's a really nice chap. And also, follow us on alternative media, because, of course, we want to break the stranglehold of Silicon Valley over everything that we do. And this means that follow us on platforms like Getter, where you can follow Lotus_com to get all the latest updates from us. And also, we are speaking, or I am speaking, at a conference hosted by Getter at the London O2, the Indigo section of the London O2 on December the 8th. I'll be speaking there as it's part of the Counterculture conference, where we're talking about why what is happening to the West is happening and what we can do about it. So part of that is following us on Getter and coming and see us, and of course, subscribe, because that keeps everything running.